What would you do if the man pretending to be your date at a wedding suddenly told the room he was in love with you and meant it? Nina Carter had no idea that one honest mistake would flip her world upside down. It started with a simple favor. Her mother, Eleanor Carter, had asked her to drop off a wedding gift for her cousin's big day. Nothing complicated. No expectations. Just in and out. Nina didn't even plan to stay. She wasn't invited after all. But as she stood at the grand entrance of the Whitaker Hotel, clutching a modest gift bag and straightening her thrifted dress, she couldn't ignore the dull ache in her chest. The same ache she always felt when family events rolled around. She hadn't received an invitation. Again. "Sorry, miss. Without an invitation, I can't let you in," the doorman said flatly, his arm barring her from stepping inside. Nina blinked. "I think there must be a mix-up. I was told this was the right date. My cousin Sloane's wedding." "If your name isn't on the list, I can't help you," he said, already looking past her. Humiliation spread across Nina's face. She started to back away, heart pounding. Then a calm, commanding voice cut through the tension. "She's with me." The doorman froze. Nina turned to see a tall man in a navy suit, collar open, no tie, eyes cool and unreadable. "She's my date," he repeated. Nina's jaw dropped. "What?" He stepped forward, lowered his voice just enough for her to hear. "Play along. I'll explain inside." Every logical part of her screamed to walk away, but the moment the embarrassment, the stares pushed her forward. "Okay," she whispered. The doorman stepped aside. "Of course, Mr. Vance." Mr. Vance? As they entered the opulent ballroom together, Nina felt like a fraud. Chandeliers sparkled above them. Waiters in tuxedos floated by with trays of champagne. Laughter filled the air. "Are you always this impulsive?" she muttered. Alexander Van Sayers, that Vance, the CEO of Vance Technologies, smirked. "Only when I need to be." "Did you just adopt a date?" "I saved a guest from embarrassment," he said simply. They weaved through the crowd with practiced ease. Nina, in her simple dress and scuffed heels, felt like a misplaced extra in a movie scene. She clutched the gift bag tighter. "So what now?" she asked once they found a quiet corner. Alexander tilted his head. "Now we commit to the illusion." "How did we meet?" Nina raised an eyebrow. "The bookstore. You knocked over a stack of biographies." "I helped you," he chuckled. "Poetic. I'm Alexander Vance." Jazz lover, book klutz. Nina Carter, book nerd. Accidental wedding crasher. They shook hands. For a brief moment, it felt almost real. As they moved toward the refreshment table, Nina asked, "So this is your ex's wedding?" Sloane Whitaker, the bride. Nina nearly choked on her champagne. Her cousin Sloane? The one who hadn't spoken to her in years? Alexander nodded. "Long story." Before she could respond, the air in the ballroom shifted. A sharp voice rang out. "What is she doing here?" Nina turned. Sloane Whitaker stood at the head table, her perfect bridal smile cracking as she stared at Nina like she was a ghost. Alexander stepped in calmly. "She's with me." A murmur spread through the room. "That's Nina Carter, the one who dropped out of med school. Didn't her dad lose everything? Why would Vance bring her?" The stares stabbed deeper than any insult. Nina stood tall, refusing to flinch. "You okay?" Alexander asked softly. "I've been through worse," she whispered. As Lauren stormed down from the table, Alexander leaned in, his arm firm around Nina's waist. "Let me handle this." But Nina had no idea the show had just begun. Sloane's heels clacked against the marble floor as she closed the distance. The hush over the ballroom was deafening. Nina felt every eye trained on her and the man who had just publicly claimed her as his date. Sloane's smile was tight, brittle, a mask barely hiding the fire in her eyes. "Jake," she said, though that wasn't his real name. Her voice oozed forced charm. May I have a word? Alexander gave Nina a reassuring glance. You'll be okay? Nina nodded. She didn't trust her voice. He followed Sloane across the floor toward the far end of the cake display, but Nina could still see them. She didn't like how close Sloane leaned in, how her hand lingered on Alexander's wrist like she had a right to it. Alexander's shoulders were square, but there was tension there. The way he leaned slightly away, the way he kept glancing back at Nina. Meanwhile, the whispers resumed. I can't believe she had the nerve to show up. I heard her dad declared bankruptcy twice. Bet she's hoping for a big payout. Nina gritted her teeth. She hadn't even meant to crash this wedding, and yet, here she was, being treated like a con artist. A soft voice interrupted her spiral. You don't belong here. Nina turned to see Brielle Whittaker Sloane's mother, clutching a wine glass like a weapon. I don't mean to be rude, she added in a tone that absolutely meant to be rude, but this is a private affair. You weren't invited. Nina squared her shoulders. No, I wasn't. I came to drop off a gift. I never planned to stay. Brielle's smile didn't reach her eyes. And yet, here you are. Before Nina could reply, Alexander returned. Everything okay here? He asked coolly. Brielle turned, startled. Of course. Just catching up. Alexander slid his arm around Nina's waist. Good, because I'd hate to think anyone was trying to make my date feel unwelcome. Brielle's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. As they walked away, Alexander leaned closer. Do you want to leave? Nina's voice was steady. No. Not yet. He nodded, then murmured, I like your fire. They returned to their table, but Nina's hands shook as she reached for her water. Alexander noticed. He reached beneath the table, gently squeezing her knee. The small gesture grounded her. I wasn't expecting tonight to unfold like this, he admitted. Nina gave a shaky laugh. You mean you don't randomly fake date strangers every weekend? Only the ones who are breathtaking under pressure. That made her look at him. And for the first time she noticed the softness behind his CEO mask, the cracks in his confidence, the vulnerability he tried so hard to hide, and maybe, just maybe, that made all the difference. Nina Carter thought she'd endured enough for one night. She was wrong. Back inside, she sat beside Jake at a candlelit table under a crystal chandelier. Across from them, a woman in pearls leaned forward, wineglass in hand. Sweet how far some girls will go to get noticed, she purred. A billionaire boyfriend just in time for a family wedding. Netflix would love it. Laughter rippled across the table. Another woman chimed in. She always watched from the sidelines. Now she's center stage. Nina bit the inside of her cheek, her nails digging into her palm. Before she could speak, Jake stood. The table fell silent. His hand rested on her shoulder. Careful what you say. You're insulting the woman I love. Nina's heart stopped. He didn't flinch. Didn't look away. And suddenly, the whispers didn't matter. Outside, under the moonlight, she whispered, You didn't have to do that. I did. Because you deserve someone who won't stay quiet while others try to erase you. She turned away, breath shallow. But it made me feel like I needed saving. Jake stepped in. I didn't save you, Nina. I stood with you. Her breath caught. And maybe it wasn't just pretend anymore. Before she could respond, footsteps approached. Sloane. Eyes glossy. Voice soft. Jake, I was wrong. Maybe it's not too late. Jake looked at her for a long, still moment. It's not too late for you to be better, he said, but it is too late for us. And just like that, the past was done. He turned back to Nina and took her hand. No more pretending, only truth. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The night air wrapped around Nina like a velvet curtain as she stepped onto the stone patio behind the ballroom. String lights dangled from the trees overhead, casting a soft glow over the space, but it did little to quiet the storm inside her. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the edge of the railing, staring out at the inky ocean just beyond the resort's cliffs. She had no idea how she got here, emotionally or literally. One second, she was dropping off a wedding gift for someone who didn't want her there. The next, she was standing in the arms of Alexander Vance, CEO of Vance Enterprises, defending her honor in front of an entire ballroom. "Nina," his voice came from behind, low and cautious. She didn't turn around immediately. She wasn't ready. Her heart still beat with the rhythm of 1,000 whispered judgments. "I didn't need you to say that," she said after a moment. "Not in front of them." Alexander moved beside her, hands in his pockets. "That's not true. You needed someone to say it." "I just happened to be the first one who did." She faced him slowly, her jaw tight. "Do you think that makes this easier? You drop a line like you're insulting the woman I love and expect me to, what? Smile and thank you? Pretend it meant nothing?" "I didn't say it to pretend," he replied. "I said it because somewhere in that room pretending stopped." Nina looked away, blinking fast. The warmth from the ballroom still glowed through the glass doors, but here in the night, everything felt stripped bare. "I've spent most of my life being invisible," she said. "People don't look at me unless they want something to whisper about later. And tonight I thought I could show up, drop off a gift and leave unnoticed." Alexander tilted his head. "Why didn't you tell me that from the start?" She sighed. "Because you already had a narrative. I was just the girl you rescued at the door, the prop for your little scene." He stepped closer. "You weren't a prop. You never were. I didn't plan this, Nina. I didn't know I needed someone until I saw you standing there, about to walk away, like the world had made up its mind about you." Nina laughed, but it was brittle. "The world has made up its mind about me. That I'm nothing more than a mistake with a last name that doesn't belong." Alexander's gaze didn't shift. "Then let me help rewrite it." Silence stretched between them, taut and fragile. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the same crumpled wedding invitation her mother had handed her earlier. He unfolded it slowly. "I found this by the bar," he said. "There's a note scribbled on the back." Nina took it, confused. She flipped the card and felt her stomach drop. Written in neat, practiced cursive were 5 words that made her chest tighten. "She doesn't belong with us." No signature, just cruelty on paper. She folded it and tucked it into her purse. "They've always thought that." "Then they're wrong." His voice was firm now, resolute. She looked up at him, finally seeing the man behind the magazine covers and tailored suits. He wasn't polished. Not now. He looked raw, almost unraveled. "You deserve more than crumbs of acceptance," he said. "You deserve to be at the table, Nina. And not as someone's +1, or the girl who got lucky." Her throat tightened. "I don't need saving." "Good," he replied. "Because I'm not here to save you. I'm here to stand next to you while you save yourself." She stared at him, stunned into silence. Then slowly her posture shifted. Shoulders back, chin high. "That sounds dangerously close to a partnership, Mr. Vance," he smiled. "Dangerous is my specialty." A breeze lifted the edge of her hair as they stood there, neither quite ready to walk away. Nina looked out over the dark ocean once more. "I don't want to be part of your revenge plot," she said softly. Alexander's expression sobered. "This isn't about revenge anymore." She glanced at him. "Then what is it?" He reached out and without asking took her hand. "It's about choosing someone who sees you," he said. "And maybe, if we're lucky, letting that be enough." Nina didn't pull away. They stood like that until the laughter from inside faded into background hum, until the wind stopped biting and felt more like a blanket, until she could almost believe this was real. And maybe, just maybe, it was. The ballroom glowed with laughter and clinking glasses as toasts were raised for the 3rd time that evening. Nina sat quietly beside Alexander, hands folded in her lap, her smile polite but distant. The ambient music floated gently, yet her mind churned. Across the table, the scrutiny had sharpened. "You know," a woman in a pearl-studded dress said suddenly, leaning forward with her wineglass tilted. "It's sweet, really. How far some girls will go to get noticed." Nina looked up, startled. The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I mean, finding a billionaire boyfriend just in time for your estranged cousin's wedding? That's a Netflix pitch if I've ever heard one." A few soft laughs fluttered from other guests. Another voice joined, lower but crueler. She always did know how to pick her moments, always watching, always waiting for her chance. Nina's throat tightened. She glanced toward Alexander, unsure whether to respond or simply leave the table altogether. Before she could decide, Alexander stood. The scrape of his chair echoed across the table. The music continued playing, but the room's attention shifted like gravity. Alexander placed one hand gently on Nina's shoulder, the other resting on the back of her chair. His voice was low, calm, but carried like thunder. "Careful what you say," he said, locking eyes with the woman in pearls. "You're insulting the woman I love." The table fell into silence. Nina's heart slammed in her chest. It was pretend, wasn't it? But Alexander didn't blink, didn't waver. The words hung between them, heavy and electric. No one dared speak. Even the servers slowed as they passed. He leaned slightly closer. Though he wasn't speaking to anyone in particular anymore, his voice was for Nina alone. "She is the only honest thing I've seen in this entire room." He straightened and walked away from the table. Nina followed, her legs slightly unsteady. Outside, beneath the strings of lights decorating the patio, she caught up to him. "Alexander," she said, her voice tight. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." "No, you didn't," she snapped. "I'm used to it, the whispers, the looks. That's not new." Alexander turned to face her, jaw clenched. "And that's exactly the problem." Nina crossed her arms. "You can't just protect me like that. It makes me feel weak, like I need saving." He stepped closer. "I didn't do it to save you. I did it because you deserve someone who won't sit quietly while others try to tear you down." Nina stared at him, chest heaving slightly, then softer. "But you said it out loud." In front of everyone. Alexander's eyes met hers. Maybe it wasn't a lie. She froze. Before she could respond, another figure approached. Sloane. Her eyes glistened, not from joy, but something that bordered on regret. "Alexander," she said, almost breathless. "I was wrong." Alexander said nothing. "I let people talk me out of us," Sloane continued. "I let pride and image get in the way. Maybe it's not too late." Alexander looked at her for a long moment. Not angry, just still. "It's not too late for you to be better," he said softly. "But it's far too late for me to come back." Sloane blinked, stung. Alexander turned away without another word. He returned to Nina, who hadn't moved. He took her hand without hesitation this time, and when their eyes met, there was no more pretending. The room behind them blurred. Only one truth remained between them now. They were no longer acting. The night air was crisp, laced with the scent of ocean salt and blooming gardenia. The laughter from the ballroom faded as they walked farther down the stone path. Neither of them spoke at first. Their footsteps echoed softly. Nina's heels clicked in time with the rustle of palm fronds above. Alexander's jacket was draped over her shoulders now, his tie loosened, hands in his pockets. Finally, Nina broke the silence. "You always run from weddings like this?" Alexander gave a soft chuckle. "Only the ones where the bride used to sleep on my chest." Nina glanced at him. "That's weirdly poetic," he sighed. "We were together for 3 years. I thought she was the one. But I wasn't the one for her. Not really. Why not? He paused, then looked up at the sky. Because she didn't love who I was, just the idea of me. The CEO, the clean suit, the magazine covers. I gave her the version of me that everyone applauded. Perfection, Nina said, and it worked, until it didn't. They walked a few more steps in silence. Then Nina gently asked, "So, what did you learn from it?" Alexander looked at her. That perfection is exhausting. That truth is messy. And that sometimes messy is what's real. She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. The path had opened into a quiet courtyard, lit only by a few low-hanging lanterns strung between the trees, casting golden circles across the pavement. Nina turned to face him. "Then what do you see in someone like me?" Alexander didn't hesitate. "You're real. You didn't care about headlines or money or what kind of suit I wear. You didn't try to impress anyone tonight, even when they tried to humiliate you." His voice lowered. "You make me wish this was real. And that scares the hell out of me." Nina's breath caught. Alexander stepped closer, one of his hands gently brushing her arm, just enough to ask for permission. She didn't move away. "I'm scared too," she said quietly. "But for a moment tonight, I didn't feel small or less. I felt seen." Alexander tilted his head, eyes locked on hers. "That's because you are." She took one step closer. He took the last. And under the soft amber glow of the hanging lights, Alexander leaned in slowly, carefully, and kissed her. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was real warm, steady, filled with everything they had not said all night. Nina's fingers curled around the lapels of his open jacket as she kissed him back. His hands settled at her waist, grounding them both. When they finally pulled apart, she didn't step back. Alexander looked at her, voice barely above a whisper. "Still think you're just the wrong girl at the wrong wedding?" Nina smiled, breathless. "No, I think I was exactly where I was supposed to be." Nina Carter zipped up her overnight bag with trembling hands, her back turned to the soft morning light spilling through the hotel curtains. Dust motes floated in the golden beam, gentle and aimless, so unlike the storm swirling inside her. The silence of the suite was deafening now. The laughter from last night, the slow dancing, the kiss under the lantern sit all felt too fragile in the light of day, like a dream unraveling with every second. She moved slowly, deliberately, folding Alexander's jacket, smoothing out the sleeves, pressing it flat like a goodbye. She laid it across the bed and stood there a moment longer, letting her fingers linger on the fabric. His scent still clung to it, clean, warm, faintly like cedar and something more personal she hadn't quite named. Then she grabbed her bag, slipped on her flats, and walked quietly out the door. In the hallway, the hotel's polished elegance suddenly felt cold, impersonal. She pressed the elevator button and stared at her reflection in the golden sheen of the doors. Her ponytail was a mess, her face bare, her eyes tired not from lack of sleep, but from trying too hard not to hope. She looked like a girl who had made a mistake, a girl who had let herself believe just for one night that she could belong in someone else's world. Behind her, a familiar voice cut through the quiet. "Running?" Nina flinched. She turned to find Alexander Vance standing at the far end of the hall. He looked nothing like the polished CEO from last night. Dressed in a plain dark t-shirt and jeans, barefoot, hair tousled from sleep, he held something in his hand, a folded piece of paper. "I wasn't," she started, then sighed. "Yes." He walked toward her slowly, not with anger, not with urgency, just with the quiet gravity of someone who had already made up his mind. "Nina," he said, stopping a few feet away, "this wasn't about convenience, it was clarity. And I don't want you walking out of here thinking you were some kind of stand-in." She crossed her arms, trying to stay composed. "Alexander, you're going back to your world boardrooms, galas, red carpets. I was just the right distraction at the wrong time." He shook his head. "You weren't a distraction. You were the only part that made sense. He unfolded the paper in his hand and held it out. I found this in Sloane's suite, the invitation they sent to your mother. Nina took it, puzzled. Her breath caught when she saw the handwritten note on the back. Elegant, precise, cold. You'll never belong here. She stared at it, chest tightening. Alexander stepped closer. She meant it to hurt you, to remind you that no matter how close you got, you'd never be enough for them. Nina's grip on the paper trembled. Alexander reached into his back pocket and pulled out a silver lighter. With one flick, the flame came to life. Without looking away from her, he lit the corner of the invitation. Nina's eyes widened. Alexander. I'm not letting them define where you belong, he said, voice steady. The flame curled up the edges of the thick cardstock, turning cruelty into smoke. He let it burn nearly to his fingers, then dropped the remnants into a nearby brass waste bin. She was right, he said, looking into her eyes. You don't belong there. But you belong with me. Tears blurred her vision. You don't know what you're saying. I do. For the first time in a long time, I know exactly what I want. And it's not the polished life people expect from me. It's real mornings, messy hair, honest conversations. It's you. She looked down, trying to catch her breath. I'm scared, she whispered. He reached for her hand, curling his fingers around hers. So am I. But I'm done letting fear be louder than truth. The elevator behind her pinged and opened with a soft chime, but she didn't move, because this time she wasn't walking away. This time she had been chosen for all the right reasons. It focused on educational access, literacy, and empowering overlooked communities. And Nina had brought it to life in ways Alexander had never imagined. They worked side by side writing grants, visiting schools and shelters, flying coach to small towns with big hearts, staying late in budget meetings, and arguing over fonts for awareness campaigns. Somewhere in between the spreadsheets and sleepless flights, their love deepened, not fast, but real. Now they were in Ecuador, visiting a rural school the foundation had rebuilt after a landslide. The sun was harsh, the ground uneven, but Nina thrived here. She wore a faded ball cap over her braided hair, her sleeves rolled up, and her shirt smudged with chalk after writing English words on a blackboard for the kids. Alexander stood across the schoolyard, watching her laugh as 3 children climbed her arms like tree branches. There were no cameras, no donors in sight, just dusty joy and the kind of tired that felt earned. He took a photo one he would never post, just to remember this exact second. When she finally noticed him, she handed the children off to their teacher and jogged over, wiping sweat from her brow. Walk with me? He asked, nodding toward the tree-lined path behind the building. She smiled and fell into step beside him. They walked in silence for a while, the cicadas buzzing, their fingers brushing occasionally until Alexander reached into his bag and pulled out a small velvet pouch. I've been meaning to give this back, he said. Nina looked at him, puzzled, then opened it. Inside was the necklace her mother had given her when she turned 18, a thin chain with a book-shaped pendant. Her mother's way of saying, you belong to stories, and stories belong to you. Her breath caught. I thought I lost this on a train in Philly. You did, Alexander said gently. Or more accurately, you left it in the side pocket of your overnight bag. I found it the morning after the wedding. She looked up at him, stunned. You told me once, he continued, that this necklace made you feel like you belonged somewhere. That when you wore it, you didn't feel invisible. Nina nodded, her fingers trembling. I kept it because I didn't want you to lose that feeling again, he said. But I think now it belongs back with you. He closed her hand around it. Then he pulled something else from his other pocket, a small box. Nina's eyes widened. No speeches, he said. No flash mobs, no perfect timing, just this. He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring, understated and beautiful. You didn't crash a wedding, Nina, Alexander said softly. You rescued my heart from being numb. You reminded me that love isn't about perfection. It's about being brave enough to show up, messy, honest, and real. He knelt. Will you marry me? Nina laughed through her tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They kissed under the trees, the children's laughter echoing in the distance. 3 months later, they married in a garden filled with books instead of flowers. Every guest brought a novel to donate to local libraries. There was no press, no influencer coverage, just real family, friends, and colleagues who had seen their journey from awkward strangers to something extraordinary. At the entrance to the ceremony stood a framed photograph. It was a grainy still from hotel security footage, the moment Nina stood in that rainy lobby holding a paper-wrapped gift. Her expression was nervous, uncertain, but her eyes, they still believed in something better. Below the photo, in gold script, was a single line. Kindness is never wasted. It writes stories even when no one is reading. Nina walked down the aisle in a cream jumpsuit, her curls pinned loosely, the pendant necklace shining softly on her chest. Alexander waited at the altar, wearing a grey suit and no tie, eyes never leaving hers. When she reached him, he whispered, "Still think you don't belong?" She smiled through tears. "I think I was always meant to rewrite what belonging means." And together, they began their forever. Not from headlines, not from spectacle, but from truth. From choosing each other every day. From pretend to purpose. 6 months after the whirlwind wedding, life had quietly bloomed into something deeper. Nina Carter wasn't the same girl who clutched a gift bag outside a ballroom door. She had become the communications director for the Vance Foundation, a non-profit Alexander Vance launched to honor his late sister, Madeline. And while the job was demanding press releases, board meetings, long days on the road, it filled Nina with purpose she never thought she'd find. Now they were in Ecuador, visiting a school the foundation had helped rebuild after a devastating flood. The courtyard buzzed with laughter as kids chased each other through puddles. Nina stood in the middle of the yard, jeans rolled, hair tucked into a ponytail, covered in dust and sunshine. She took photos with teachers, hugged children, and translated questions with a fluency she'd practiced for weeks. Alexander watched her from across the yard, leaning against the school gate. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up and khakis smudged from the earlier cleanup effort. He didn't care. All he could focus on was Nina, how she moved with ease, how her smile radiated comfort, how she made strangers feel seen. She didn't just work for the foundation. She was its heartbeat. When she finally looked up and caught his gaze, he gave her a slight nod. "Walk with me?" he asked, gesturing to a shaded path beyond the school. Nina handed off her camera to a teacher and joined him, wiping her palms on her jeans. They walked side by side down the tree-lined path, branches hanging low, cicadas humming. Neither spoke for a while. Their hands brushed occasionally, but neither reached out. There was something unspoken, something patient, building between them. Finally, Alexander cleared his throat and pulled a small velvet pouch from his bag. "I've been meaning to give this back," he said. Nina stopped and took it. Inside was a necklace, her necklace. A delicate gold chain with a pendant shaped like a book. She gasped. "Where did you find this?" "In the overnight bag you left at the hotel." "I've had it since the day you walked out," she blinked. "I thought I lost it on the train. I looked everywhere. I didn't want to give it back until I knew you remembered what it meant to you." Nina held the pendant in her palm. Her mother had given it to her on her 18th birthday. "You belong to stories," she'd said, "and stories belong to you." "You told me once," Alexander continued, "that when you wore it you didn't feel invisible. That it made you feel like part of something." She nodded slowly, voice catching. "It was the only piece of my past that made me feel like I mattered." "Well," You matter now. To so many, but especially to me. Before she could respond, he reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small box. Her breath caught. No big speeches, he said softly. No public proposals, just you and me, and this. He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring, timeless and quiet. Nina's heart thudded. You didn't crash a wedding, Nina. You rescued me from a life of perfection that meant nothing. You reminded me that love is supposed to be messy, brave, and real. I want that. For the rest of my life. He dropped to one knee, on the dirt path beneath the trees, as birds chirped somewhere overhead. Will you marry me for real this time? She laughed, a small, tearful sound. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. He stood, and they kissed under the canopy of green, the smell of earth and sunlight between them. 3 months later, they married again, this time in a garden filled not with roses, but books. Instead of floral arrangements, guests brought novels to donate to community libraries. There was no press, no headlines, just people who had witnessed their journey. At the entrance to the ceremony stood a framed photographer, grainy image from the hotel lobby, the moment before it all began. Nina, clutching that gift bag, uncertain but hopeful. Underneath, in gold script, it read, "Kindness is never wasted. It writes stories even when no one is watching." And this was theirs. They danced that night beneath lanterns and stars, and for the first time in her life, Nina didn't feel like she had to prove she belonged. She had rewritten what belonging meant. And Alexander? He didn't just find a fake date that night. He found home. 6 months later, Nina stood before her open suitcase in a hotel suite filled with soft morning light. Dust floated lazily in the golden beam, breaking through gauzy curtains, but her hands were anything but still. She folded Alexander's jacket, the one he had draped around her shoulders that night by the ocean, smoothing the sleeves like she was pressing down a memory. It still smelled like him cedar and mint and something clean, familiar. She laid it gently across the bed, then stood staring at it, her fingers resting a moment longer than necessary. It had been a dream, hadn't it? One weekend of magic, of defiance, of truth. And now what? She zipped her bag and crossed the suite in silence. The hallway outside was quiet, opulent, and somehow colder than it had been last night. Nina pressed the elevator button and caught sight of herself in the reflective door. Eyes tired, lips tight, heart uncertain. Behind her, bare feet padded against marble. She turned. Running? Alexander's voice was raspy from sleep. He stood at the end of the hall, in a t-shirt and jeans, hair tousled. In his hand, a small white card. Nina exhaled sharply. Not running, she replied. Just leaving before I get left. He approached her slowly, held out the card. I found this in Sloane's suite. It was taped to the back of your mum's invitation. Nina took it. On the back, in crisp handwriting, it read, "You'll never belong here." The words hit like a slap she'd always seen coming. They were precise, cruel, and familiar. She wrote it to remind you, Alexander said quietly, that no matter how close you got, you'd always be an outsider. Nina's fingers trembled. Without another word, he struck a match and lit the edge of the note. She gasped. The flame curled the paper into ash, falling like snowflakes into a brass bin beside the elevator. She was right, he said, meeting her eyes. You don't belong there. You belong with me. Tears welled in Nina's eyes. Alex, I don't know how to be enough for your world. He stepped closer, gently took her hand. Then let's build a world that fits us, one with truth, not perfection, one where the only thing expected is kindness. The elevator pinged. Nina didn't move. Her bag dropped softly to the carpet as she stepped into his arms. 3 months later, the world had moved on from Sloane's wedding scandal. But Nina hadn't forgotten. Now communications director at the Vance Foundation, She traveled with Alexander from city to city launching libraries, community centers, scholarships. She wasn't just telling stories anymore. She was helping people write new ones. That morning, they arrived in Quito, Ecuador, to visit a school rebuilt after a flood. Nina walked the courtyard with dust on her jeans, kids clinging to her arms, her hair caught in the breeze. Alexander stood across the yard watching her, a quiet smile on his face. He carried a velvet pouch in his hand. When she finally met his gaze, he nodded toward a shady path behind the building. "Walk with me?" She followed. They strolled beneath tall trees, their fingers brushing now and then, until he stopped and handed her the pouch. She opened it and froze. Inside was a silver pendant shaped like a book, her mother's necklace. "Lost years ago." Nina gasped. "Where?" "I found it in your overnight bag the night you left," he said. "You told me it made you feel like you belonged somewhere." She clutched it tightly, eyes brimming. "I kept it," he continued, "not to hold on to you, but so you'd never forget who you are." Then from his other pocket, he produced a small box. Her breath caught. He opened it, revealing a simple gold ring. "No big speeches," he whispered. "No spotlights, just truth." "You didn't crash a wedding, Nina. You walked into my life and made me feel again." He knelt. "Will you marry me?" Nina's hands covered her mouth. She nodded through tears. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." Back in the US, they married in a garden filled not with roses, but books donated by guests to fill libraries across the country. At the entrance stood a photo, a grainy hotel security still, Nina clutching a gift bag, caught in a moment of doubt. Below it, a plaque read, "Kindness writes stories even when no one's watching." And this time, everyone was watching. But not because she'd crashed a wedding, because she had rewritten what it means to truly belong. In a world that often measures worth by wealth, appearances, or pedigree, this story reminds us of a timeless truth. Dignity doesn't come from where you start, but from how you carry yourself when no one's clapping. Emily wasn't invited, wasn't expected, and certainly wasn't welcomed, but she showed up with grace, held her head high, and left as the one who mattered most. Jake, a man who once lived for perfection, discovered that authenticity and quiet strength were what made life feel real again. For older generations, many of whom have seen both the good and the cruel sides of people, this story whispers a truth we've always known deep down. Love doesn't follow a script, and respect cannot be faked. Sometimes the best chapters begin when we stop chasing approval and start embracing our own worth. It's never too late to be chosen for who you really are. And sometimes, even in a room that tries to erase you, your light is exactly what changes everything. Because the most powerful kind of belonging is the one you choose for yourself.